Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. We'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, for another bonus episode recorded live here at Illumia Momentum in beautiful Nashville. If you're following along, this is our second in several conversations that we're having here at the event. Super excited to be back. Had a great time last year, having an amazing time again here this year. But for this conversation, we have a member of the Illumia team, formerly known as Transact Seaboard, to talk a little bit about their background, tech stacks, digital infrastructure, all that good stuff that we love talking about on this show. So Chris, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and your role, and then we will go from there.
Thank you so much, Dustin. So I'm Chris Setcos. I'm the SVP of Partnerships and M&A at Illumia, formerly known as Transact plus Seaboard. I'm super excited. My team is responsible for everything third party. So if you think about all of the third party integrations that a campus or healthcare or senior living environment would need, that's what my team is responsible for. Resale partnerships, infrastructure partners, you name it, that's what my team covers.
I mean, it's a wide array of things, so I'm sure we'll have no shortage of things to talk about here. But since you are, we'll talk to a few members of the Illumia team. We'll kind of get their takes on it. But, this event is sort of the turning of the page, the new chapter of the new brand. And, this event, being Illumia Momentum now, kind of combining the brands and all that. Just curious on kind of reflections, is just kind of a new moment, new chapter, bringing everything together for this event. So just any reflections, things you'd want to share.
Yeah, it's such an important inflection point for us. So we've been two companies that have operated very successfully. We've had some crossover in certain markets and environments, and then we've had also complementary products. And now we have the opportunity to bring it all together and really look at it from a capabilities perspective so that we're bringing to the market one Illumia, one platform. And really, for me, managing all of the partners and partnerships as we sit here in the exhibit hall, what that means is having a core system, a core platform of capabilities, and then extending with partners where healthcare campuses, higher education campuses, and senior living environments may need additional functionality.
Yeah, and I'll have to give you all kudos to just seeing the color schemes and everything. It's a very bright pink and different tones like that, which I feel like is very distinct and very cool. But moving on from that, talking about the work that you and your team are doing every day, just to kind of set table stakes. What are you seeing right now with how higher ed institutions are building and kind of evolving their tech stacks and digital infrastructure?
So what's not going to be a surprise to all of you is that we're all talking about cloud transformation. So everyone is on this cloud journey. They're looking at how can they transform and move their core systems, so their core ERP, their core finance systems, to the cloud. And what they're seeing is they've all grown up kind of like snowflakes a little bit, where we're all different. We each have different business rules and sets of capabilities. And so therefore, after decades and decades, we've built a lot of customizations. Well, that's just not scalable. And it also is a huge impediment to moving to the cloud. So what I see is, first of all, we're talking about platform capabilities. And in order to move to the cloud, you have to get to a unified kind of set of rules, kind of get back to, quote, baseline. And then where the platforms maybe don't have all of the capabilities, you really have to extend with partners. And so where my team comes into play and what I'm really passionate about is building and making sure that we're extending with an open and extensible ecosystem. Now, there's usually a misnomer in there where people think that open means we're just collecting partners like candy. And that's not what it's really about. It's not really about having as many partners as possible, because I think what that means is open sounds like chaos. And it can't be chaos. It actually has to be more about intentional integrations so that everything extensible through partners is meaningful and is value added for what schools and healthcare institutions might need.
Yeah, I like that clarification because I think it's obviously trying to find that right balance of, like you're saying, kind of the uniformity, getting back to basics and figuring out the baseline of how you're sort of kind of capturing and formatting your data, and then like how these systems kind of speak to each other. And I guess it's like an interesting opportunity that like this, move to the cloud is sort of forcing these conversations that maybe, could have or should have been happening, long before. But it's like that you were, as a, higher ed IT leader, doing all these customizations and kind of making it, work. But then, like clarification of like, that's just not scalable long term. And we already had a conversation sort of acknowledging pieces like that of where like, good on you for investing all that time and, resources and stuff like an effort into doing all that. But sometimes it's like, I don't know, like an update goes through and it breaks everything or, whatever else. But that idea of at least sort of like giving like a sandbox to play in where like everything is sort of like able to kind of come together within a bound of kind of commonly set rules and everything. And I think that is, great to kind of be having now sort of this like moment again where like those are conversations that have to happen. So it's kind of like, all right, if you were a laggard on this, like you got to like get on board. And so I think that was kind of the idea of like the causing of the changes. So like, in the dynamics where there's certainly going to be people that were leaps and bounds ahead, other people that were like lagging behind or whatever else. So just curious, I guess, just any of the kind of segue into kind of a follow-up question of what I was going to ask next of like, what do you see as the cause of all these changes, like the cloud migration and all that, and, things around kind of the, data structures or whatever else. So I think maybe take this in a way of like, how are people that you or your team are interacting with, like, how are those like higher ed leaders that are coming to these conversations? Because I guess, the word choice I'm using of like, well, people are being forced to do it now. Like that's maybe an assumption of like, everybody's going to be like kicking and screaming, but like, are people looking at it more as, I guess, kind of like an opportunity of like, well, if we're doing this, you might as well, kind of look under the hood of all these things and see how everything's kind of, working together. So any reflections on that sort of like the dynamics of like the interactions you're having around these changes?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really good point, which is all of this is forcing an overall inflection point of how should we be doing the business of higher ed, right? To keep it really simple. So I think there's a few things that have happened. Number one, the people that were around and built all of those customizations, they're just no longer there. They're retiring. It was from a different age. And what we see is there's actually a generational gap. So now the people that are taking those jobs are from maybe, 2 generations later, and they're actually used to interacting with things in a much more technology forward way. So there's a dichotomous difference there between how one generation perceived technology and how another generation perceives it. And everything needs to be frictionless, by the way. So I think that's one thing, is there's a generational effect happening. I think the second thing that we see happening is just security, right? So bad actors are everywhere. Now, even with the advent of AI, it's actually easier for bad actors. Bad actors, they have full companies that are there, that are set up almost like legit companies that are there to support them in their bad acting behavior, right? Whether it's ransomware attacks or anything like that. And so because of security, the move to the cloud and making sure that there are secure hosting environments has caused folks to, make sure that they're using partners where cloud security and safety are better measured by those, who are equipped to do it. So I think those are a couple of things. And then thirdly, I would say, as they're really looking at their entire campus ecosystems, the promise of Cloud ERP is really, okay, we're going to provide you a general kind of menu of capabilities. And then where those capabilities are not enough, you should extend with partners. What I will say, again, kind of getting back to the meaningful connections and partners versus like chaos, is I don't think any higher education institution is looking for more partners. They're actually looking for less friction. And so when you see schools bringing forward partners, it's not that they really just want to work with that partner. It means that there's a business problem there that they've not been able to solve. And so one of the approaches that we take here at Illumia is we take a step back and we look at the problems they're trying to solve. And then we figure out, okay, is there a bundle of partners that would make this easier for the campus? Are there capabilities that we should be looking for in partners that would close that gap? And are we seeing certain trends? And so I think that's really the where the time is right, especially as we rebrand into one Illumia.
Yeah, and I think that is like the kind of two next questions I want to talk about were that idea of like, pitfalls to avoid, and then like just maybe, balancing and integrating these like complex ecosystems. So that is the idea of like, I guess certainly a pitfall would be like you're kind of bringing too many cooks in the kitchen or something, like you're having too many different maybe spot solutions where it could be, just as well or better serving your needs to kind of like, streamline. But I think those sort of like things that are on people's minds are like, one, that's sort of like this opportunity to review, just sort of your whole kind of ecosystem and, things we already mentioned. But then it can be where it's like, okay, now we're sort of facing completely new problems that they, those old folks, back in the day weren't even really, anticipating or sort of, dealing with around like AI and some of those like fraud pieces or whatever else. But so I guess, maybe we'll just kind of stick on this for a bit of, again, on sort of like, the balancing of, various priorities and like pitfalls to avoid, like, just speak more on that, I guess, of just maybe any like particular examples of where you've seen people be successful balancing those priorities, and other times when, there maybe was something where you were having a conversation where they were already at that point of like, we've got too many sort of things we need to kind of like, just, we'll break this apart, but start with kind of any kind of success stories that you can think of like, they kind of threaded that needle of balancing, security, convenience, seamlessness, and those sort of things. So I'm always kind of curious about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. And maybe I'll use our own kind of company history as an example. So we grew up out of a lot of M&A activity, spin-offs, mergers, et cetera. And with that, and we've been around for 50 years. So with that, you can have a lot of different technology solutions that exist almost in vacuums. And so what we've done is we've really tried to elevate the conversation instead of looking at, I like to call them toys, right? Instead of like finished products, we kind of look at like what the toys do. So we look at capabilities. And I'll just give you one example. So biometrics is a hot topic right now, right? We see it with TSA PreCheck. We see it if we go overseas, a lot of overseas customs and immigration control are completely using facial recognition and retina scans and all kinds of technology like that. We tend to be a little bit behind in the United States. But when you think of like something like biometrics, you might just say, okay, that's a security thing. We don't see it that way at Illumia. So the way we look at it is, okay, well, what are the different modalities? What are the different use cases that are for biometrics? Well, you have access control as an example for dorms. You have maybe check into events. You have checking into residential dining to make sure that you can go to your all you care to eat. But you also have biometric payments. And we see, okay, are all of those modalities the same? No. There's retina scan, there's palm, there's facial recognition. Some are faster than others. Some are high velocity, some are not. Some require better security, like if you're talking about access to labs. So I think, to answer your question, the trap is when you kind of look at finished products or toys and widgets. I want to acquire this toy versus, okay, what problem am I trying to solve? What are the actual capabilities? And am I choosing a partner where all of those capabilities exist? And so that integration, using reporting, all of those things are a lot easier.
Yeah, I guess it makes you think of there's no shortage of things that you could use to control access to a building or whatever else. And it's like, there could be a way where it's like one company or one type of solution could solve all the problem, where it's like, well, we could actually use, facial recognition for everything. And that would just be like, we're going to go all in on that and sort of build, with that in mind. But it could be like, well, and I guess maybe like use this to kind of segue to the pitfalls. Like it could be tough if you're like, well, we're going to use this one company over here for facial recognition for this one type of access thing. And then there's going to be like, RFID for this thing over here. And it's a different company. Like, so I think those would be the sort of the things if you're having the kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing and not being able to kind of fully optimize, kind of embracing, maybe something around like access control or something. So I guess just speak on anything like that, I guess, of maybe like those ideas of like you did get that one new shiny toy and are using it for maybe kind of like a novelty use case or something, which like isn't the worst thing in the world. But I think, institutions are needing to be really critical as they're building sort of their institutional infrastructure. So yeah, just curious any reflection on those sort of dynamics.
Yeah, I have one example in, ISV partners, don't hate me. I'm not going to call it any names, but I'll give an example here. So kind of the early precursors to some of the agentic AI that we're looking at now, they kind of emerged as two-way texting, chatbots that you had to train. And so what we saw on college campuses is there was a chatbot solution that popped up for career services. There was a chatbot solution that popped up for recruiting. There was a chatbot solution that popped up for advancement. And so you would have campuses that had different departments that operated in silos that would buy all of those different chatbot solutions. When really, again, going back to capabilities, it should have been like, okay, well, we need a better way for our patrons, customers, prospects to interact with us. We know that we need some sort of two-way communication. We know we want the information feeding into our back-end CRMs. What can we do as an enterprise? Because then we actually have a full story of the customer from, when they're considering coming to our institution all the way through, while they're here, measures of student success to graduating and then after becoming donors. So I think that's just an example of fragmentation and buying widgets and toys versus actually looking at capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great example. And I think that is I think there's competing notions around there's obviously going to be highly optimized tools and systems for certain functional areas and all that. And it's fine, but you have to do it with the sort of frame of reference and thing in mind of this has to be able to feed back into the system. We have to get away from these sort of siloed things. That's either buy something at an enterprise level and, kind of spread it out across the institution or, allow sort of exceptions to that rule to have something that can play nice with, a core system. So there's not sort of career services is well served. They've got everything they need and they're happy. But then it's and I think a lot of alumni engagement is a big area where there is just sort of this fog of war often where it's a highly equipped alumni team, but then nobody knows oh my gosh, yeah, I mean we interact with them and then you interact with them or we don't know what each other's those are I think a common area that I've seen in some conversations that comes up is just sort of alumni engagement stuff because it's sort of a just very unique kind of use case. So I think trying to get something that's much more comprehensive, integrated, and working well for everybody, not just one team. But we will wrap up though. We're asking this to everybody as we're closing out to kind of give you the final word, advice that you would give to higher ed leaders navigating this moment.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is to higher ed leaders is don't consider doing things the way you've always done them. I would question everything, question the systems you're using, look for those companies that are truly innovating, looking to streamline operations for all of you. Again, with what my team does, and we're talking about really creating a whole ecosystem of partners, the goal is to make sure that you all have capabilities. Find companies out there that make that easier. You should be very cautious if companies say, yep, you can choose any partner you want and everything's created equally. The company should have a standpoint and an opinion on which partners are better for what use cases and be able to help you navigate, because this business of higher education is not easy.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think, it's cool just seeing a lot of folks here, I guess, kind of embody a lot of what you're talking about, and just great to have interactions with them, everybody who's here, and appreciate you for chatting with me and sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and, of course, Illumia in the episode description, but it's great chatting with you.
Great. Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.